where we left off, lesson 12, class 12, part 2, and in philosophy, just to make sure we're not thinking it's government. We were talking about what does it mean to be the same through change, and if one is a naturalist, you cannot be the same through change. Because that requires you to be something that is other than the change, than the parts, the physical parts. And when the physical parts change, that means there's, unless you're a lot of people go, well, I'm a brain. How's that? Great, but your brain changes too. And if your brain changes, doesn't that mean you change? But then they say, well, I'm my memories or my ideas. That's all fine and well, except for one thing. As soon as you say ideas, now you're suggesting something other than physical, right? Unless by ideas you mean some kind of chemical makeup that goes on in your brain. And again, chemicals change. But the question I had before we were so rudely interrupted by the phone, what does that say about universals if one is a naturalist? Can one believe in universals if they are a naturalist? The answer is, just take a stab at it. You say,
no.
Why not?
Because physical things can't be in place.
More, yes, and just the definite. What is the definition of a universal? This is a test question, by the way. I can promise you that. So it's been on every single test I've ever written in philosophy. It's a multiply exemplifiable abstract entity. Abstract is non-physical. So if you're a physicalist or a naturalist, you don't believe in abstract entities. Ergo, you cannot believe in universals. Okay? Unless you believed in some kind of multiply exemplifiable physical entity, but who does? Okay? So the idea that, and I'm using that term here, they can't sit there and claim that you have mental properties in a sense that are different than brain properties. To the physicalist, naturalist, mental properties are brain properties. Now this is going to be important because as we talk a bit about metaphysics, I go into two different areas. I go into philosophy of mind, and then I go into philosophy of religion, okay? Because we want to talk about two things. We want to talk about who are we, right? What am I, okay? And then I'm going to go into God. Does God exist? What does it mean for God to exist? What type of being exists? What kind of, and the like, okay? What is God like? And so that turns into philosophical theology, philosophy of religion, and that is heavily influenced by metaphysics. Okay? So, okay. Any questions so far? You must have a lot. Whether you know it or not, that's a different story. Somebody asked me why this is important.
Why is this important?
Hey, great question. Again, the starting points from where you start has a determining factor as to where you will end on the most important issues of life. And I don't just mean of life like choosing life, but the things we deal with on a daily basis that you think are important are by and large determined by how you answer these fundamental questions, such as what types of things exist? Do more than just physical things exist? Does only physical things exist? Do both exist? Remember the statement, the quote I said. If it was for the other class, I'm sorry you didn't get it, but if it's for this one, I'm going to repeat it. What is today a matter of academic speculation begins tomorrow to move armies and pull down empires. Do you recall that? What is today a matter of academic speculation begins tomorrow to move armies and pull down empires. This idea, if you are a naturalist, that means you do not believe in God. That means you do not believe in the morality that is consistent, or at least that comes from God. What would that say about your belief that all men are created? Emphasis on the creation. If you don't believe there's a creator, you don't believe all men are created. If you don't believe all men are created, then you don't believe all men are created equal. And if you don't believe we're created equal, then you don't believe we are endowed, because there is no endower with certain unalienable rights, such as the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So then, what does that do for your right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? If you are a naturalist, you would have to say, if you want to be consistent with your first philosophy, I don't believe that humans have a natural right to life which is endowed by God. Now, if you're a naturalist, you go, what would a right be? Because as a naturalist, not a natural law theorist, but as a philosophical, metaphysical naturalist, one who believes everything is physical, what would a right be at all? Ink on a paper? It can't be an idea. It could be a desire to live, but how does that make you different than a cockroach that scurries when the light goes on? Is there something special about us? And that is determined by and large by that first philosophy of whether or not everything is physical or not. Because if everything is physical, imagine this, then we are on this, small thing. We call it Earth, right? Big as a grain of sand at best compared to the rest of the universe, right? Why is this grain of sand any more valuable than any of the other grains of sand out there in the universe? Because there's life on it. What is life? Can somebody answer that question? Give me an answer. Have you taken biology?
Not yet.
You didn't take it in 7th grade, 8th grade, 9th
Oh,
grade?
yeah.
What did they tell you it was? What did they tell you life was? They didn't. They presupposed it. It's too hard of a question for them to answer. They can tell you what living things do, but they already recognize what living things are, correct? Did they tell you what yellow was when you took physics? They presupposed you knew what it was. And you do, right? Through, what was the word I used? I already know it. Ostension. Mom taught you things by pointing at them, right? And naming them, and you recognize those things, right? It's kind of how we know life, but it's interesting. Don't know much about metabolism, right? But you know what things metabolize, correct? They started with living things and they asked, what do living things do? They didn't ask the question, what is life, did they? Seems to me we already know intuitively. Okay. I'm going to give you some distinctions today. 2 of them. 2 types of distinctions, each have 2 types. Start with, there are 4, but I only give you 2 in this case. One's called the modal distinction, M-A-D-A-L. And the other is called a real distinction. Modal distinction and real distinction. A modal distinction says A can exist without B, but B cannot exist without A. A can exist without B, but B cannot exist without A. There's going to be a lot of terms thrown at you, okay? These parts, we'll call these the parts, right? Perhaps can exist without the ship. But the ship cannot exist without the parts. Catch that? The parts can exist without there being a ship. I can take it all apart, throw it in a pile. But the ship can't exist without the parts. It's distinction. The ship and the parts are modally distinct. The two things, one's dependent on the other. The ship's dependent on the parts. Not too hard, is it? Not a concept. Okay. That's called a modal distinction. Here's another term. Let's use rocks. Let's create a pile of rocks here. They're all roughly the same size and shape, but there's a pile here. Let's take a rock and put it over here. The rock can exist without the pile, but the pile cannot exist without the rocks, correct? There's a term in metaphysics called mereology. Mereology. Mereology is a study of part-whole relations. You ever hear me say stuff like mereologically speaking? Mereology. We're talking about part-whole relations. Okay? The ship cannot exist without its parts, but the parts can exist without the ship. And what that says is we could take things like rocks, and they're from the parts, a new property emerges. You say emerges a new property. Sounds like good lyrics. Okay? From all these parts, you put them together in a certain configuration, you get an engine, or you get a boat or a car, right? When before you had steel and rubber and the like, okay? You put them all together, you get something new. With the rocks, yeah, it's a little more random, but you put them together, you get what's called a pile. You could do this at home. You could conduct your own experiments. Some of you are. It's called laundry, okay? And you take one article, you put it on the ground, you put another, and eventually you got a new property. You no longer have a shirt or a dress, you now have a pile of laundry, okay? And that may or may not be good or desirable, but nonetheless, something emerges from the parts. And that's mereology. Why is that important? Well, because many people believe in what's called epiphenomenalism. What? Epiphenomenalism. This idea that somehow from the parts, new phenomena emerges, right? So epiphenomenalism. And you will hear them say stuff like, you know, that the part is somehow emerging from the new properties emerging from the complexity of the whole. And, you know, you can imagine you have all these gears and springs and a box, and next thing you know, you got what's called a watch or a clock, right? And that sounds all pretty cool. Complex, right? Well, a lot of people believe that where we're going with this is the mind. What is the mind? What am I? Remember? This is all geared towards asking, who am I or what am I? And so it says, you know, am I just nothing more than a new emergent property? And we'll talk about that. It's called emergentism. So, lends itself to a modal distinction where the phenomena that emerges, that new part, is dependent upon the parts, okay? That the parts can exist independently from the whole, but the whole can't exist independently of the parts. Okay, that A can exist independently of B, but B cannot exist independently of A. I use the sun and the sunlight as an example often. The sun can exist as a body independently of its rays. Imagine the sun will eventually burn out, right? And lose its energy. Will it still be an entity? Well, yeah. But will the rays exist? So A can exist without B, but B cannot exist without A. Okay. And that's a modal distinction. Then we got a real distinction. I'm just going to put modal right here. May or may not be able to be seen. The other distinction's a real distinction. And a real distinction says that A can exist without B, and B can exist without A. A can exist without B, and B can exist without A. And so what you'll notice is between the two distinctions, they turn on the conjunction. The modal distinction uses the word but. A can exist without B, but B cannot exist without A. In a real distinction, A can exist without B, and B can exist without A. So this cap can exist without this pin, and this pin can exist without this cap. The cap is not dependent on the pen, and the pen is not dependent on the cap. Now, of course, the wetness may depend on, the use of something like the cap, but, that's a different story. But their existence is not one of dependence, but independence. A and B can exist independently of one another. Make sense? Okay. Why is that important? Because we want to know if I'm a brain or if I have a brain. Or the third option, am I the result of a brain? Right? Am I the result of a brain? Am I a brain? Or do I have a brain? So we have to think in terms of how do we test that? How do we know? This isn't guess, and somebody goes, well, it's science. Well, no. The problem with science is scientismists. What did we talk about? Remember us talking about science and scientism? And often in science, you get people who are metaphysical naturalists. And you've got professional scientists doing amateur philosophy. And they don't know how to assess their own philosophical claims, such as everything that exists is physical. Well, how did you determine that scientifically? You can't, okay? Science is the result of applied philosophy, if that makes sense. And so there's a lot to be said about that. If you're a scientist and you assume philosophically that everything that exists is physical, well, of course, all of your scientific answers and philosophical answers and moral answers are all going to have to do with what? Physics and chemistry, right? It's called reduction. If A is identical to B and B is identical to C, then A is identical to C. So, if the mind is identical to the brain's identical to atoms, then the mind's identical to atoms. How can you have an impure set of atoms? Somebody say you have impure thought, right? But if your thoughts are impure, well, what would that mean? If they're nothing more than the atoms. Does that make sense so far?
Kind of.
Yeah, well, we're gonna be kind of going over this quite a bit. All right, so we've got the two distinctions I said, modal and a real. I also want to give you another type of distinction, too. It's called the type token distinction. Type, TYPE, / token distinction. And after that, we'll close up shop for the day. I noticed that you have the Nicomachean Ethics on the desk there. Do you have the Nicomachean Ethics? Do you?
In my dorm.
In your dorm? She has your book in her dorm. You're looking at me like you're confused.
Yeah.
You agree she has your...
I'm confused.
You have the Nicomachean Ethics, correct? She says she has it in the dorms, her dorm. Is she lying?
She has a copy of it.
Copy of it? What's that mean? Does she have the Nicomachean Ethics in her dorm room?
Yes.
You believe her. And if she has it in the room, how do you have it there?
Because it's a copy of the original.
Does she have your book? Is that the Nicomachean Ethics?
No.
It's not?
It's a copy of the original.
Of the original. Is there really an original? Where's the original at? Did you copy this original?
No.
How do you know it's a copy of the original? Okay, first of all, I want to know why she has your book and you say she doesn't have your book. You say she has a copy of it, but what does that mean? What does that mean to say one has a copy of it? Is it the same book?
It's same.
Is it the same book or not? Yes or no? We're gonna pull Kamala Harris. Answer yes or no. She likes to say that during debates. Yes or no. I think her and Jerry Nadler use the same voice. I'm Jerry Nadler. Or am I? I'm Kamala Harris, but she always says yes or no. Okay? Is it the same book? He's saying you don't have, now, you're supposed to have the Nicomachean Ethics.
Mm-hmm.
And he says you don't have the same, he says he has the Nicomachean Ethics and you don't have the same book, right?
Mm-hmm.
Are you telling me she's got the wrong book? You're not telling me that. She's supposed to have the Nicomachean Ethics and you have the Nicomachean Ethics. And you're saying she doesn't have the same book. It's going back to the same conversation we had earlier, remember? About sameness. And you're on the right track and you intuitively know it, you just don't know how to articulate it yet. Okay, she has a copy, yes, we'll call it a token. Okay, which is unique. It's her token, it's not your token, they're different. She has her token, you have your token. What do you have that is the same type? Okay, and what if her type is actually in Spanish? Is it still the same type? Why? What makes it the same? Let's take the Bible. Well, now we take Aristotle. Heck, it's just as good. Hey, what language was the Nicomachean Ethics written in? Rhymes with eek.
Greek.
Oh yeah. Okay, so
That's a trick question.
well, that's tricky. No, but yours isn't in Greek, is it? No. Okay. Is it? Are you sure it's the same Nicomachean Ethics then? It's clearly a different token.
It's the same content but different.
Right, what do you mean by the content? So the content is not the ink on the paper now, is it? It's not the shape of the print, is it? It's not even the language, is it? The language is representing something, is it not? Okay. It's representing, you get the type, the stuff that is multiply exemplifiable, right? Not the print, the type, the type of thing it is. And you have the token, that thing, okay? That's why you could have your own copy of it, right? Your own token of it, your own book, but and they will still be considered the same book because you have the same content in that, and the same ideas that are communicated through the ink and the shapes and the print and the language. You understand? So an audible Bible is as much a Bible as a printed Bible. Would you agree? In as much as it has the same content. A Spanish Bible is the same as an English Bible, correct? Unless you're a King James advocate, right? Actually, the debate really isn't over the English, it's over the actual text, the Greek text, the manuscripts they used. Just to be clear on that, so none of you are, no biblical scholar who watches this and goes, oh, what an idiot. It's not over the actual English, okay? So the type token distinction suggests one thing, that you could have the same content in a book or the same type of car in two different tokens, right? And so you could have sameness even though the physical things are different. Now, why is this important? Well, what if you're a physicalist or a naturalist, that is? Somebody believes that everything is physical. Can each and any book have the same content? No, they'd all be unique. That's one of the problems with believing you're being a naturalist. You go write a book and then I just go copy it, and then I get sued, right? And I go, hey, according to his view, this is an original work. He says they're the same words. They can't be the same words because physical things can't be in more than one place at a time, and you believe that only physical things exist. Meaning you could literally only write a book. And then if they printed them off, the only one you actually wrote was the one you did yourself. Because there are no such things as ideas, because ideas are non-physical things. Keep that in mind. When somebody's a naturalist, starts telling you that everything that exists is physical, and you break out math and books and ideas that are represented by things. You want to be able to make a distinction between the type of thing it is and the token. Okay? What is this? Nobody wants to answer. What did you say?
Number one.
Is it the number one?
It's the symbol.
The numeral, which is a symbol, right? This isn't the number. Right? Arabic, Roman, English, Spanish. They're clearly different, are they not? This is really ink in a shape. Okay? And we call that shape what? One. Ink, a different shape. What do we call it? One. Different shape. One. Uno, which means, but they all represent something that is not blue, not shaped, not sized, not located here, called what? That I'm going to call one. A number. They represent the number. Okay? And so you have a token of the type of thing it is. And in that case, you have a distinction between the physical thing and the actual thing. And the physical things are unique to themselves, can only be in one place at a time. That symbol can only be in that one particular place at a time. I mean, that set of ink, okay? The shapes can certainly be in more than one place at a time. The color can be in more than one place at one time. The number that it represents can be in more than one place at a time. Does that make sense? Our economy would not be able to function if universals didn't exist. We'd be able to trade, you know. How many cows? 3. I have no idea what that is, right? If, you know, if 3, we know what physical stuff is, but when you start recognizing that numeric value exists in more than one place, then you go, oh yeah, non-physical reality does exist, and is that easy? Not all physical things are seen, are they? Some are heard. Okay? Now, we recognize the existence of certain things outside of our senses. Just because we can't take it through our 5 senses, and just because it's not physical, it doesn't follow that it doesn't exist. And that's why metaphysics is important, because you've been taught your whole life as though to believe in non-physical reality is some kind of leap of faith, when you literally could not function without the assumption of non-physical or reality of non-physical reality. Commerce would be worthless. Family relations would be nothing. Value statements, non-physical things like thoughts. Okay? Does my mind exist? Are you sure? See it? Taste it, smell it, hear it? How do you know my mind exists? You know, it's not something you could test. You could check my brain. Okay, we're going to be dealing with that here soon. All right, any questions? Is this good stuff? I like it. This is some of the funnest stuff I've talked about. How about you? Doing good? That's what I want to hear. Okay. I think we should call it in. All right. Did everybody take did you hit pause?